Welcome, everyone, to the Player Prop Happy Hour Week 8 edition, presented by the 33rd Team. I'm your host, as always, Josh Larky, joined as always by my co-hosts and prop bettors, Ryan Reynolds and Ben Wolby. Just like each and every week, the three of us have each brought 3 player prop bets to the table. We will rapid fire outline the bet we're taking, the sports book we found with the best odds, and why we like this bet. Without further ado, Ryan, with the shades, kick us off with your first prop bet of the day.
I'm going to take Derek Carr over 235.5 passing yards on DraftKings at minus 115. As you know, gentlemen, I like to bet on guys that everyone hates. Here we are with Derek Carr, throwing for 300 yards in three times this year, each of his last 2 games. Before that, he had 3 games below 200 yards. The first, he left early with a throwing shoulder injury. The next 2, he was clearly inhibited while playing through that shoulder injury. 2 weeks ago against Houston, he looked better. Colts are giving up 253 passing yards per game in this contest. Josh and I talked about this earlier this week. We like multiple Saints wide receivers this week, so let's just bet on the quarterback to go exceed expectations.
Love this bet. Yeah, if anyone wants more context, check out the fantasy and betting podcast Ryan and I do on Mondays and Thursdays. It's in the 33rd Team Podcast Network on Apple and Spotify. We outlined just how good each matchup is for the Saints receivers, and I think Ryan's got this one right. One thing he also has right is his expert picks and predictions for every game. Check that out on the 33rdteam.com. I see Ryan going, he's got a good hit rate. We will not say 100%. It's not close to 100%. Nobody's close to 100%, but he'll give you his picks and predictions for every game, along with a quick cliff notes on what he's looking for in each game. And then on Saturdays, he drops exactly what he's going to be betting on in each game. Those are both free on the 33rdteam.com. Ben, we'll kick it to you. What is your first prop bet of the day?
I'm going to take Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown, over 50.5 receiving yards in a revenge game against Baltimore. He's 4-3 on this number, with the one loss being exactly 49 yards, just 1.5 yards under. But his elite 27% team target share ranks 13th behind just Zay Flowers. So that brings me to my next point about the revenge game, playing against his former team that took him in the first round. And Josh Dobbs, his playing time is coming to a close. I think that there is a good chance he is motivated to lead it all out on the field, keep peppering that ball to his number 1 wide receiver. And when you consider that since James Conner's injury happened, Dobbs is averaging 7 more pass attempts per game, and the number 1 wide receiver against Baltimore has gone over in 5 of 2, with the 2 losses being Amari Cooper in the game that Dorian Robinson-Thompson was thrown in an hour before kickoff, and the game where Nick Westbrook-Ikine was getting targeted by Ryan Tannehill, who left for Malik Willis.
I like the reasoning there. If you want to hear more from Ben, our resident data scientist, you should check out his show with Alex Caruso on Wednesdays. It is I would say confidently, the biggest show right now on Twitter live streams. They're getting 10,000 plus listens every single week. And check out Ben's projections. He puts them out on the 33rdteam.com each week. They're free to read, and he gives you a little insights as to what is the intuition, the logic, some of the math behind those projections. My first prop bet of the day, I'm looking at Jaylen Warren. I'm going to take him over 3.5 receptions. The reason for this in many ways is that it is plus 145 on DraftKings, kind of implying that long-term this type of bet needs to hit about 41% of the time for us to make money. I think this is more of a true 50-50 type line. So I like that little edge right there. On the season, Warren's averaging 3.7 receptions a game. He's 3-3 on this line. That sounds pretty 50-50 right off the bat. But then we look and I'm like, why would this be so low? Well, last week against the Rams, he had season lows in routes 7, in targets 2. But that was the Rams. The Rams allow the 2nd fewest receiving yards per game to running backs, the 8th fewest receptions per game to running backs. And now Warren gets the Jaguars. Their defensive front's got Josh Allen. It's got Travon Walker. This is a very, very good unit. And Jacksonville's also pressuring quarterbacks at the 12th highest rate this year, 36% of dropbacks. What happens when you get pressured? You check the ball down to the running back, and Jaguars or running backs against the Jaguars are averaging the most receptions per game this year at 7.3. We just need 4 from Jaylen Warren. 5 running backs this year through 7 games have at least 5 receptions against Jacksonville. 3 other running backs just missed this at 3 receptions. I think it's a true 50-50 line. We're getting it at plus 145. Jaylen Warren over 3.5 receptions. Ryan, your second bet of the day.
Next up is another quarterback play from an NFC South quarterback, Desmond Ridder, over 219.5 passing yards, minus 115 on DraftKings. I'm not crazy about this because I don't have a ton of confidence in Desmond Ridder. It's primarily a bet against the Titans' Kevin Byard-less secondary. Falcons' offensive line should be able to mitigate the Titans' strength, which is their front 4. Ridder's beat this number in 4 of 7 games, including each of the last 3. Titans are giving up 256 passing yards per game this year. This is a game where teams are already basically saying to the Falcons offense, we want Desmond Ridder to beat us. We're loading up the box. It's just a matchup play for the most part.
I like this one too. Guys, Ryan is Ryan Reynolds, NFL on Twitter. Ben, what is your second bet of the day?
You stole my thunder a little bit, Josh, talking about this Rams defense. I like their matchup this week, or rather, I dislike the matchup this week for Tony Pollard. I'm going to be taking his longest reception under 12.5 at minus 115 on DraftKings. He's 3-3 on that number, but the Rams have actually only allowed 1 single reception of 13 or more yards through 6 games. And of all people to have that reception, it wasn't Christian McCaffrey. It wasn't DeAndre Swift. It wasn't Najee Harris or Kenneth Walker. It was DJ Dallas. There have been 28 running back targets against this defense, and the 1 reception longer than 12.5 yards was to DJ Dallas on a play where he lined up not out of the backfield, but actually out wide left. And Pollard, he has exactly 12 routes run and 1 reception for 3 yards lined up out wide this season. All 3 of Pollard's receptions that were longer than this amount, he did so generating yards after the catch. His 3 receptions of 13 or more yards totaled 105 total receiving yards, and 97 of those yards came from yak, about 72%. And he wouldn't have had those long receptions without the yak. The reason this is notable is because the Rams are allowing the second fewest yak per reception to the running back position. Ernest Jones, their linebacker, he's one of the highest rated linebackers in the NFL. He should be able to contain Pollard, and teams, like you said, Josh, are passing to their running back at the 8th lowest rate in the NFL.
Love that line. Guys, at Ben Wolby to follow our data scientist on Twitter. He puts out some of the best Twitter threads in the game, might I add, where he gives you even more insights to the bets he's taking, his projections and whatnot. Also, if you have not signed up yet for Underdog Fantasy, you should rectify that. Sign up with promo code 33rd, 33RD. You get a 100% deposit match up to $100. So if you put in $100, now there's $200 in your account. And there's a lot of analogs for the stuff we're talking about in the fantasy games market. Their fantasy pick'ems couldn't be more fun. Choose high-low on at least 2 players. And I would be very shocked if there's not at least 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 analogs for the prop bets we're talking about in the fantasy games market. Underdog Fantasy, promo code 33rd. Get that 100% deposit match when you sign up. My second bet of the day, I'm going to go with Christian Kirk over 54.5 receiving yards. It's minus 115 on DraftKings. He's been over 5 of his past 6 games. He was 10-7 to the over last year. He runs 83% of his yards 83% of his routes from the slot. The Steelers happen to give up the most fantasy points per game to slot receivers this year, over 30 per game. And now let's look at yardage. I'm only going to look at reps where receivers were running the route out of the slot against Pittsburgh, removing every out wide rep. There have been 8 players in only 6 games against the Steelers this year where they had at least 54 receiving yards from the slot. Nico Collins, 166. Puka Nacua had 132 yards from the slot. Brandon Ayuk had 100 of his yards in that game from the slot. Devontae Adams had 85. Jacoby Myers had 70. Mark Andrews had 56. Deebo Samuel had 55. And Zay Flowers had 54. I'm expecting over 54.5 yards from Christian Kirk. I think it's a great matchup. Does not look like Zay Jones will be returning this week from the knee injury either. He is still yet to practice. And this is simply a bet on a talented producing player in the perfect matchup. Ryan, what is your third and final bet of the day?
Vonta Smith over 51.5 receiving yards, -114 on FanDuel. Josh got this a little bit of a better line yesterday, I believe it was. I still like it here. As you guys know, I like regression plays. This is a regression play. Commanders are giving up the second most receiving yards to wide receivers. When they played in week 4, Smith went for 7 receptions for 78 yards on 9 targets. His usage has been a bit all over the road. His catch rate's been really low in 2 of the last 3 weeks, which is one of the reasons why I'm betting on this. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. You also have to think that at some point, NFL defense are going to have to overcommit to stopping A.J. Brown, who's going absolutely ballistic right now. Enter Devonta Smith. Like betting on his upside here.
Ryan Reynolds, NFL on Twitter. Check out his expert picks and predictions on Thursday. Check out what he's betting on for each game on Saturdays. That's all free on the 33rdteam.com. And in all those articles that we're talking about that are on the site, you can hop into our free Discord. It's always linked in there. There is no better place if you want more prop bets, start sit advice, trade advice, waiver help, DFS advice. It is all there. Ben, your third and final bet of the day.
My third and final prop is Bryce Young's longest completion under 33.5 yards, -120 on DraftKings. I grabbed this at under 32.5, -110. So if the line moves, I take that too. Why would I take that? Because Bryce Young doesn't have a single completion of that long all season. His longest completion came in week 5 against Detroit. It was a 30-yard completion with 15 of those yards coming from yards generated after the catch. And what I think becomes most notable is that Houston has allowed the fewest completions of 33 or more, just 3. And those were throws that averaged 34 air yards and 8 yards after the catch. So let's break that up. From the yards after the catch standpoint, Young's longest completion by just an air yards perspective is 22, which is 10 yards lower than this number. And the 8 yards after the catch still doesn't put him above that 33 number required for this to go over. And alternatively, Carolina's pass catchers are averaging 4.2 yards after the catch per reception, and that is the 4th lowest number for all pass catchers in the NFL. So since Young hasn't had an air yard pass that would catch this over, since he hasn't had the yak from his receivers that would require this to go over, and given that this is the defense that is allowing the fewest completions of this distance, I think the under makes sense, but I will be holding my breath, and I am going to take that.
Well, don't hold your breath too long. We need you back for next week. We need you also back for your projections. Those are on the 33rdteam.com. Follow Ben at Ben Wolby on Twitter. Before I get to my final prop of the day, if you want some of my content, my rest of season rankings and trade value chart, they always hit the site on Wednesdays. You get a nice downloadable PDF, color-coded, the best way to make trades. It's what I vet all of my personal redraft trades through. And my Week 8 fantasy rankings get up on the site on Tuesdays. A lot of player write-ups in there for context behind the rankings. Ben's projections are embedded in there. Ryan ranks the top 12 fantasy defenses each week and writes them up. And you also get aggregated ranks from not just myself, but Kev Wheeler and Matthew Hill. This is all, again, free on the 33rdteam.com. Now, my final bet of the day is going to be Isaiah Pacheco. We're going to go over 15.5 receiving yards. It's -115 on BetMGM. It's -120 or higher on most other sports books already. Pacheco's been over this number 4 of his past 5 games. He's had at least 3 targets in 4 of his past 5 games. He's led Kansas City running backs in routes run all 7 games this year. Running backs against Denver, who they're playing, have the 3rd most receiving yards per game. But here's where it gets really interesting, because we want him to get at least 16 receiving yards. You look at some game logs. Through 7 games, 11 running backs have over 15.5 receiving yards against the Broncos. 11. At least one running back has done it in every single game as well. I think we're about to have at least 12 running backs after this week, because Isaiah Pacheco, I'm betting on him to go over 15.5 on BetMGM. Folks, that'll do it from us, the Player Prop Happy Hour. From myself, Josh Larky, from our data scientist, Ben Wolby, from our associate director of fantasy and betting, Ryan Reynolds. Thank you, everyone,